You go through your day, making choices based on what you think others will approve of. At work, you agree with ideas you don't fully support just to fit in. With friends, you laugh at jokes that don't land with you or share stories you hope will impress. Even alone, you replay conversations in your head, wondering if you came across the right way. This constant adjustment happens quietly, without you noticing most of the time. It feels normal, like part of getting along in the world. Yet it leaves you with a steady sense of unease, as if your own thoughts and actions aren't enough on their own. This is the reality for many people today, where the opinions of others shape more of your behavior than your own principles do. If this resonates with you, take a moment right now to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep delivering clear, Stoic guidance that actually changes how you live. Number 1. The quiet ways validation seeking shows up in daily life. Most people do not wake up and decide to chase approval, but it slips in through small habits that feel harmless at first. You post something online and then check the responses more often than you admit, adjusting your next words based on what gets the most likes. In conversations, you hold back honest feedback because you sense it might create tension, choosing instead to nod along and keep things smooth. Over time, these patterns train your mind to scan every situation for signs of acceptance, turning ordinary moments into quiet tests of your worth. The Stoics saw this clearly as a distraction from what truly matters, because it shifts your focus from your own standards to the unpredictable reactions of those around you. Without noticing, you start living as if other people's views are the final judge of your day, and that slow shift creates a constant low-level tension that drains your energy before you even realize it is happening. The drive for validation often starts in ordinary settings like family dinners or team meetings, where you notice yourself choosing words that will land safely rather than truthfully. You might stay late at work not because the task demands it, but because you want your boss to see you as committed, even when your own judgment tells you the extra hours add little value. This habit builds layer by layer until it feels like the natural way to move through life. Yet each choice quietly hands over control of your peace to forces outside yourself. Epictetus reminded us that external things such as praise or criticism belong to others and cannot be commanded by us. So tying your mood or decisions to them is like building a house on sand. The result is a life where your actions feel borrowed rather than owned. And the steady discomfort that follows is the body's way of signaling that something essential is missing. Even in private moments, the need for validation lingers, showing up when you second-guess a decision you made earlier because you imagine how someone else might view it. You scroll through old messages or replay a simple exchange, searching for clues that you are liked or respected, and each review chips away at your ability to trust your own judgment. Over months and years, this creates a background noise of doubt that makes even small choices feel heavier than they should. The Stoic path cuts through this by insisting that your value rests in the quality of your character and effort, not in the fleeting feedback of the crowd. When you begin to see these patterns for what they are, a subtle but persistent form of self-surrender, you gain the first real chance to step back and reclaim your attention. Society reinforces the habit through constant exposure to curated images and highlight reels that make ordinary life feel inadequate unless it receives applause. You compare your quiet routines to the loud successes others broadcast, and before long your internal measure of a good day becomes whether anyone noticed or commented. This comparison is not dramatic, but it is relentless, shaping your expectations without your full consent. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should concern ourselves only with what is our own to control. Yet seeking validation pulls us repeatedly into the territory of other people's thoughts. The quiet frustration that builds is not random. It is the direct cost of living, as if your worth must be earned anew each time someone looks your way. At its core, the pattern reveals itself in the way you hesitate before acting on what you know is right, waiting instead for some sign that others will approve. You delay a necessary conversation or avoid a boundary because the possible disapproval feels heavier than the benefit of honesty. These hesitations accumulate into a life that drifts toward the average rather than toward your own best judgment. And the Stoics viewed this drift as the surest way to lose your freedom. The strength they spoke of comes from refusing to let external noise dictate your steps, and recognizing the everyday forms of validation seeking is the first step toward that refusal. Once you see how deeply these habits run through ordinary hours, from the first check of your phone in the morning to the last review of your day at night, the path forward becomes clearer. The Stoic response is not to fight the feeling with force, but to observe it calmly and choose differently, one small decision at a time. Each time you act from your own sense of right instead of from the hope of praise, you loosen the grip that other people's opinions have held for so long. This is not about becoming cold or isolated. It is about becoming steady in a world that constantly asks you to bend. Number 2, why the need for validation actually weakens you. When you tie your sense of self to what others think, you hand them the power to lift you up or pull you down with a single comment or silence. A passing criticism that once might have rolled off now lands like a judgment on your entire character. And a bit of praise can temporarily inflate your confidence, only to leave you craving the next dose. This cycle keeps you unsteady, because your emotional state now depends on factors you cannot control. The Stoics called this a fundamental error in living, because true strength lies in the virtues you cultivate inside, not in the approval you collect from outside. Every time you seek validation, you confirm to yourself that you are not yet enough on your own, and that quiet confirmation erodes your resolve over time. The weakness shows up most clearly in the way you begin to avoid risks that might bring disapproval, even when those risks align with your principles. You stay quiet in a discussion where your insight could help, or you water down a decision to make it more palatable, and each compromise chips away at the person you are becoming. Seneca observed that we are often our own worst enemies when we fear the judgment of others more than we fear falling short of our own standards. The result is a life lived in a smaller circle than you were meant to occupy, where potential stays locked behind the constant calculation of how others might react. Seeking validation also trains you to perform rather than to live authentically, and over time the performance becomes exhausting. You maintain a version of yourself that you believe will be liked, yet the effort required to sustain that version leaves less energy for genuine growth or rest. The Stoic view is that this split between your real self and the approved self is the root of much inner turmoil, because it prevents you from ever fully standing in your own truth. Weakness here is not loud or obvious. It is the steady fatigue of never quite being at home in your own skin. Another layer of weakness emerges when you start measuring your progress by external markers like likes, promotions, or compliments instead of by the steadiness of your character. A good day becomes one where you receive positive feedback rather than one where you acted with integrity regardless of the outcome. This shift in measurement makes your motivation fragile because it can be taken away at any moment by someone else's changing mood. Epictetus taught that the only true good is what cannot be taken from you, and the habit of seeking validation directly contradicts that teaching by placing your sense of success in the most unreliable place possible. The longer the pattern continues, the more your decisions become reactions rather than deliberate choices. You say yes when you mean no, you stay when you should leave, and you chase goals that were never truly yours, all because the alternative might look bad to someone watching. This reactive way of living weakens your ability to steer your own course, turning you into a passenger in your own life. The Stoics saw this loss of agency as the greatest form of poverty a person can experience, because it leaves you rich in other people's opinions, but poor in self-command. Ultimately, the need for validation makes you look weak to yourself first, and that internal judgment is the hardest one to shake. You know on some level that you are capable of more, yet the habit keeps pulling you back to safer, more approved ground. Breaking free begins with admitting that this pattern has cost you real strength, and the Stoic response is to replace the craving for approval with the discipline of self-respect. Each day you choose your own standard over the crowd's approval is a day you grow visibly stronger in your own eyes. Number 3. Stoic principles that free you from the approval trap. The Stoics built their entire philosophy around a single clear line. Separate what you control from what you do not. Your opinions, efforts, and character fall inside that line. Other people's thoughts fall outside it. When you seek validation, you cross that line repeatedly, investing your energy in territory that was never yours to manage. Marcus Aurelius kept reminding himself that the opinions of others are simply noise, and the wise person lets that noise pass without attachment. Applying this distinction in daily life means noticing when your mind is reaching for approval and gently pulling it back to your own actions instead. Epictetus taught that we are disturbed not by things themselves, but by the opinions we form about them. And the opinion that "I need to be liked" is one of the most disturbing of all. Once you see that this opinion is optional, you gain the freedom to drop it. The practice is simple in theory and demanding in practice. When the urge to check for approval arises, pause and ask whether the action itself is worthy, regardless of who sees it. Over time, this question becomes a habit that rebuilds your independence. Seneca warned against living for the gallery, meaning performing for an audience instead of living for your own reason. The Stoic alternative is to act as if you're always observed only by your own conscience, because that is the only witness whose verdict truly matters. This shift removes the exhausting need to manage impressions and replaces it with the calm focus of doing what is right. The strength that follows is not flashy. It is the steady confidence of knowing you are no longer at the mercy of other people's changing views. The Stoics also emphasize that virtue is its own reward, meaning the satisfaction of living according to your principles should be enough without any external applause. When you internalize this truth, the absence of praise stops feeling like a loss and starts feeling like freedom. You no longer need someone else to confirm that your choice was sound. Your own clear reasoning becomes the confirmation. This principle turns ordinary actions into sources of quiet pride that no one can take away. Another key Stoic idea is to focus on the present moment and the task at hand rather than on how the moment will be received later. By keeping your attention here, you cut off the mental habit of projecting into other people's future judgments. The result is deeper engagement with whatever you are doing, whether it is work, conversation, or solitary reflection. That deeper engagement itself becomes the measure of a well-lived hour. In the end, the Stoic path to freedom from validation is not about rejecting relationships, but about entering them without the hidden demand for approval. You show up as you are, speak as you believe, and let the chips fall where they may. This honest presence is what the ancients called living in accordance with nature, and it carries a strength that no amount of external praise can ever provide. Number 4, practical steps to stop seeking validation. Start by tracking the moments when you notice yourself adjusting for approval, whether it is rewriting a message before sending it or changing your opinion mid-conversation. Write down 3 such moments each evening without judgment, simply to make the pattern visible. Awareness alone begins to loosen the grip, because you can only change what you first see clearly. Over weeks, the list becomes shorter as your default behavior shifts toward honesty. Next, practice deliberate silence when the old urge arises. Instead of speaking to fill the space or gain agreement, let the moment sit. The discomfort you feel is the habit breaking, and sitting with it without acting on it builds real mental toughness. The Stoics called this voluntary discomfort a form of training, and it pays off by showing you that the world does not end when you stop performing. Set a clear internal standard for each major decision of the day. Ask yourself what the most rational and virtuous choice would be, then follow it before considering how it will look to others. Write the standard down if needed, so it stays in front of you. This simple filter turns vague feelings of "will they like this" into concrete questions of "is this right?" Consistency here rewires your decision-making process at its root. Limit the external feedback loops you allow into your day. Check messages or social media only at set times, and when you do, notice how quickly your mood can swing based on what you find. Use that observation as fuel to shorten the next checking session. Gradually, the emotional dependence on those loops weakens, and you regain hours of undivided attention for your own work and thoughts. When you receive praise or criticism, respond with a brief internal acknowledgement, and then return your focus to the action itself rather than the reaction. A simple phrase like "that is their view, not my measure," can serve as a quick reminder. Repeating this keeps praise from inflating you and criticism from deflating you. maintaining the steady center the Stoics prized. Finally, end each day by reviewing one choice you made solely because it aligned with your principles, no matter how small. Let the memory of that choice become the source of satisfaction instead of any external response you may have received. This nightly practice strengthens the muscle of self-approval until it becomes stronger than the old need for outside confirmation. Number 5. The strength that comes when you no longer need approval. Living without the constant search for validation brings a calm confidence that shows in your posture, your words, and your decisions. You move through the day with fewer second thoughts and more direct action, because your mind is no longer divided between what you want to do and what you think you should do to be liked. People notice the difference, even if they cannot name it. They sense a person who is settled in himself rather than reaching outward for reassurance. This presence is the quiet power the Stoics cultivated and the kind of strength that lasts. Your relationships improve because they are built on honesty instead of performance. You say what you mean without softening it for effect, and others learn they can trust your word because it is not shaped by the desire to please. The connections that remain are deeper and more genuine, while superficial ones naturally fade. The Stoics understood that real friendship thrives when both sides are free from the need to impress, and you experience that freedom firsthand. Work and creative efforts gain new energy because they are driven by your own standards rather than by the hope of recognition. You finish tasks thoroughly even when no one is watching, and the satisfaction of a job well done becomes its own reward. This shift turns ordinary responsibilities into opportunities for personal excellence, and the results compound over time into a life that feels solid and self-directed. The inner peace that replaces the old anxiety is perhaps the greatest gain. Without the mental habit of scanning for approval, your thoughts settle more quickly and your evenings feel quieter. Sleep comes easier because the day's actions were not performed for an audience, and waking hours carry less background tension. Marcus Aurelius described this state as the tranquility that comes from living according to reason, and it is available to anyone willing to stop outsourcing their worth. You also become a steadier example for those around you. Children, colleagues, or friends who watch you act with independence begin to question their own reliance on external praise. Your life quietly demonstrates that it is possible to stand firm without applause, and that demonstration carries more weight than any lecture. The Stoics believe that living well is the best form of teaching, and your daily choices become that living example. In the end, you discover that the strength you were always seeking was never going to come from outside validation. It was waiting inside the moment you decided your own judgment was enough. The world keeps turning, people keep offering opinions, but none of it touches the core of who you are anymore. This is the freedom the Stoics pointed toward, and it is the most practical, most enduring form of power a person can claim. Keep choosing it day after day, and the weakness of seeking approval becomes a distant memory replaced by the quiet certainty of a life well lived on your own terms. Number 6. The hidden cost of living for other people's eyes. Every time you adjust your behavior to gain approval, you pay a price that is rarely obvious in the moment, but accumulates over years. You give away small pieces of your time, energy, and authenticity in exchange for fleeting nods or smiles that lose their value almost immediately. The Stoics understood this trade as one of the worst bargains a person can make, because you exchange something permanent, your self-respect, for something temporary and unreliable. The hidden cost shows up as a vague dissatisfaction that follows you even after you receive the praise you sought. This habit slowly reshapes your identity until you become more defined by what others expect than by what you truly value. You start choosing paths that look good on the surface while ignoring the quiet voice inside that knows better. Over time, the gap between your outer life and inner truth widens, creating an internal friction that no amount of external success can fully ease. Seneca repeatedly warned that living according to the opinions of the crowd turns a free person into a slave, and the chains are invisible until you try to break them. The cost also appears in missed opportunities for real growth. When you avoid actions that might draw disapproval, you simultaneously avoid the challenges that would strengthen your character. You stay in safe conversations, safe jobs, and safe relationships, all while your potential for deeper excellence remains untapped. The Stoic view is that discomfort and honest effort are the only paths to virtue, yet the need for validation keeps steering you away from both. Another quiet cost is the erosion of your ability to trust yourself. Each time you defer to someone else's judgment instead of your own, you weaken the muscle of independent thinking. After enough repetitions, even simple decisions feel uncertain because you have trained your mind to look outward first. Epictetus taught that the greatest freedom comes from relying on your own reasoned judgment, and every validation-seeking moment moves you further from that freedom. The long-term price shows up most painfully in moments of crisis or important life choices. When a real test arrives, ending a toxic relationship, speaking an unpopular truth, or taking a principled stand, you hesitate longer than you should because the fear of disapproval has become deeply ingrained. The Stoics saw these decisive moments as the true measure of a person, and living for approval leaves you unprepared when they come. Recognizing these hidden costs is not meant to create guilt, but to create clarity. Once you see the real exchange rate of seeking validation, the choice to stop becomes rational rather than heroic. The Stoic response is to stop making the bad trade, one decision at a time, and to reclaim the energy, authenticity, and self-trust that were quietly being spent for so long. Number 7. How to handle praise and criticism without losing your center. Praise feels good in the moment, but the Stoics treated it as something to be examined carefully rather than swallowed whole. When someone compliments you, acknowledge it calmly without letting it inflate your sense of self. The danger lies in starting to crave the next piece of praise, which quietly shifts your motivation from doing good work to seeking good feedback. Marcus Aurelius advised viewing praise as mere smoke, pleasant for a second but gone the next, and this perspective keeps you grounded. Criticism stings more sharply because it triggers the same approval-seeking mechanism in reverse. Instead of immediately defending yourself or feeling diminished, pause and separate the useful part from the noise. Ask whether the criticism contains any truth you can use to improve, and discard the rest as someone else's opinion that belongs to them. This calm sorting process prevents criticism from derailing your progress or mood. The balanced Stoic approach is to treat both praise and criticism as external events that have no direct power over your inner state. Your job remains the same before and after the feedback, to act with reason, integrity, and effort. When you consistently respond this way, you build a steady center that neither compliments nor complaints can easily shake. In practice, this means developing a short mental routine for handling feedback. Receive the words, thank the person if appropriate, then privately evaluate the content against your own standards. If it aligns, adjust course. If it does not, release it without further mental rent. Over months, this routine becomes automatic and frees enormous mental space. The Stoics also recommended reflecting on your own motives before seeking any feedback at all. If you find yourself fishing for compliments or bracing for criticism, that is a signal to step back and recenter on the work itself. The goal is to reach a point where external voices become background noise rather than the main soundtrack of your life. Ultimately, mastering praise and criticism transforms your relationships with others and with yourself. You become someone who can listen openly without becoming dependent, and who can disagree without becoming defensive. This balanced strength is rare in modern life and deeply attractive because it signals a person who is no longer ruled by the opinions of the crowd. Number 8. The liberating power of living by your own standards. When you finally stop seeking validation, a profound sense of liberation settles in that is difficult to describe until you experience it. Your days feel lighter because you are no longer carrying the invisible weight of managing other people's impressions. Decisions become simpler and faster since the extra layer of "how will this look?" disappears from the equation. The Stoics called this alignment with reason true freedom, and it is one of the most practical benefits of their philosophy. Living by your own standards also restores deep self-respect that was quietly leaking away with every approval-seeking choice. You begin to trust your judgment again, and that trust compounds into genuine confidence that does not need constant external proof. Each time you choose what you know is right over what might be popular, you cast a vote for the person you are becoming. This shift changes how you show up in the world. You speak more directly, listen more openly, and act with clearer purpose because your energy is no longer split between performing and being. People sense the difference even if they cannot explain it, and your presence carries a quiet authority that comes only from inner alignment. The practical power appears in small daily victories that accumulate into a completely different life trajectory. You take on meaningful challenges you once avoided, in situations that no longer serve you, and pursue goals that truly matter to you rather than to the crowd. The compound effect of these choices over years creates results that approval-seeking could never have produced. Inner peace becomes more consistent because your emotional state no longer rides the unpredictable waves of other people's opinions. You experience more steady contentment and fewer emotional highs and lows, giving you the mental clarity needed for deeper reflection and better decisions. This tranquility was the ultimate goal of Stoic practice, and it becomes available once validation loses its hold. In the end, living by your own standards reveals that the strength you were chasing through approval was always available inside you. The moment you stop outsourcing your worth, you step into the full ownership of your life. This is not a dramatic transformation, but a steady, realistic return to your natural state of self-command. The exact freedom the Stoics pointed toward for over 2,000 years. Keep choosing your own measured judgment over the fleeting comfort of validation, and watch how quietly powerful your days become.